be explaining Bokashi composting and how I use it to fertilize my plants. Bokashi composting, it's a method of composting that's really fast. It can be done from start to finish once you put your food scraps in about a month. If you live in a colder climate like I do, I live in Seattle, Washington, where it's pretty rainy and cool the majority of the year. So in that case, it takes a little bit longer for it to catalyze, and so it'll take about 2 months in that case. Bokashi composting is also really easy. You don't need to tumble it like regular compost. You don't need to aerate it. You don't need to consider the brown to green ratio. It's just overall a much easier process. And then finally, last but not least, is that it is practically odorless. When you have it in the bin, it doesn't smell like anything at all. And then when you open the lid of the bucket, it smells kind of like a sweet fermentation. So overall, it's a very different experience compared to regular composting. Okay, so before I get into showing how to actually use this composting method, I just want to go over 3 tips that I wish I knew before I started this. First one is the white mold looking stuff is a good thing. I have thrown a bucket away thinking that my bin went bad, but it's a good thing to when you see this kind of like fluffy white stuff growing in your bucket. That means that it's working actually. What you don't want to see is black, blue, brown mold, the kind of stuff that grows on strawberries. That's what you don't want. That means that your bucket has gone bad. And another way that you can tell, aside from visually, is the smell. So if your bucket smells sweet, fermenty, then it's good. But if it smells like rotting food, then it's not good. And then this happens when you either didn't close the lid or you introduced rotting food. Yep. And then tip number 2 is that you want to keep air out, but don't worry too much about it. In the past, I've watched other people and they've said, try your absolute best, push down all the layers, even put weights if you have to. And so I took like rags and heavy like beans to try to push things down as much as I could. Some people even purchase like a tool that can keep things pressured, but it's really unnecessary. I've done it in the past, it didn't make a difference. I don't do it now, and it doesn't matter at all. So don't worry too much about it. Just make sure that you keep the lid closed and don't open it when you don't need to open it.
Tip number 3 is that Bokashi tea is not fertilizer in the way many people say it is. The liquid that comes out of your bin over time is great to dilute and water your plants with, but it's not going to provide nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. Instead, this tea has beneficial microbes that will keep your soil alive and healthy, which is good.
Okay, so now that we know the overview of Bokashi composting, let's get into the basics of how this works and how this is done before I show you the process from start to finish. And we're going to start with the layer system.
When you're putting compost in your bin, you want to do a kind of layer system. First starting with the Bokashi bran on the bottom, then adding food scraps, really anything that isn't rotten, and going from there. Now you just add more bran, more food scraps, some more bran again, and then finally put a lid on it and you wait 2 to 4 weeks. After those 2 to 4 weeks are up, you're going to take your compost bin with all of your layers and mix it with soil. Then you have to wait another 2 to 4 weeks before this finally becomes compost. This compost can now be used like you would with regular compost by mixing it with your plants.
All right, now that we know the basics, let's do this. I'm going to start slowly at first with the first layer, and then after that, we will speed things up.
When you start your bucket, you want to start with your Bokashi bran. This is the stuff that makes Bokashi composting. It has all of the microorganisms that make this composting process happen. You want to put a solid layer of this on the bottom to completely cover it, but not too much so you don't clog the holes. If you clog the holes, then you might not get any liquid tea that you can use to dilute and water your plants with. And use any food scrap that you can't eat, such as banana peels and other vegetable scraps. You can even put meat and dairy in a bokashi compost, but make sure not to put anything rotten. The microbes that are on rotten food are different from the microbes that catalyze bokashi composting. So these two different microbes will have to compete each other in our compost, and we want to make sure that the good ones are the ones that win. Because this composting method is anaerobic, it not only does not require oxygen, it actually dislikes oxygen. So you don't want to open your compost bin unnecessarily. Because of that, I actually gather my food scraps into an old yogurt bin over the course of a few days rather than opening my bin every time I have a scrap ready. I leave this bucket in the fridge and even sometimes freeze it until I have enough to make a layer. I put it in the freezer to make sure it doesn't rot before I'm ready to throw them into the bin and open the lid. Layer on enough of the bokashi to completely cover the food. Really, the more the merrier, to make sure that our bokashi microbes outcompete any non-bokashi microbes. But this brand can be expensive, so the layer that I'm putting here is a pretty good amount. You then want to get rid of all of the air that could be trapped inside, so press down with something flat like the bottom of a yogurt tub or its lid before closing the bokashi bin. Now close the lid and do this all over again once you've accumulated enough food scraps to fill another layer. This could take a couple of days or even a whole week or more, depending on how much food you eat and whether that food produces any scraps. As you can see, the bin is doing really well after about a week without any bad microbes outcompeting the good ones. And you see that white growth? That's the good stuff. That's the kind of stuff that we want to see here. Now, you just keep going until your bin is as full as you want it to be.
Okay, great. So now we know how to fill our bucket. And once you fill your bucket as high as you want it to go, just close the lid and keep it closed for at least 2 to 4 weeks. And then at that point, it is time to mix.
So we're outside now, and I'm going to mix the bokashi compost that has been sitting with its lid closed for a few weeks now with regular gardening soil. It's easier to mix them when you do small portions at a time, so I'm going to do a kind of layer system again by adding a little soil, then a little compost, mixing these two, then adding more soil and compost, etc. Alright, so what I'm about to show you looks really gross because I was very lazy and waited maybe as long as 2 months since I last opened the lid. This was good because it allowed the bokashi to process well, but now the white mold looking stuff has overgrown a lot, so beware. This is a lot more white stuff than I've ever usually seen, but it's actually what you want. A lot of people see some white mold growing and they throw away their bucket because they think it's gone bad, but it hasn't. Smell your bucket and see if it smells like a strong, pungent, but still sweet smell. It shouldn't smell bad like regular compost does. Then just keep mixing, small portions at a time. Once everything is mixed, put your bag into a place where animals cannot get to it and let it sit for another 2 to 4 weeks until it's all broken down. Once it's broken down, you're ready to use it as compost like you normally would. Mixing this with your plants will really help them thrive and get the nutrients they need to grow healthy and deter pests naturally. Happy growing!